So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Dan Murray. He's Executive Vice President of the American Transportation Research Institute. He is going, which is, I'm going to say is the sort of
research arm of the trucking industry.
Not-for-profit research arm of the American Trucking Association. So he's got over 25 years of experience. He's been a great friend to MATC. He's been to a number of our events. In fact, he was at one of our kickoffs, and we were getting the kernel for the first MATC way back in 2004, and he helped focus some of our work on the freight side. So we've asked Mr. Murray to come and talk about some of the work at ATRI, and some of the research that's going on. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. So I guess to be fair, a couple housekeeping items. I'm a big believer in death by PowerPoint. So I've got about 600 slides, as you know, and I'll have you out of here by dinner time. You can laugh, I'm kidding. It's not going to be that bad. But I am going to talk very, very fast because I have a lot of stuff to get through. I'm going to do a quick little infomercial on ATRI that'll take 30 seconds. We were created by the American Trucking Associations back in 1954, but we're independent legally. We're filed as our own 501c3 not-for-profit. But we share a lot of data with industry and the American Trucking Association. So my first probably 10 slides, I'm going to walk you through some economic stuff that may just bore the heck out of you. And I'm going to go through it fast, but my motive is to dispel a lot of the media headlines about what's going on in the industry, et cetera, using the economic data. And then I'll jump into these critical issues in the industry and either what ATRI is doing in terms of research about those issues or what we know about those issues. And I'm going to go fast. Hopefully we have time for Q&A. I'm monitoring my time closely here, but that's my sort of mea culpa in advance of everything, that I'm going to talk fast because I have so much to fly through. The idea that the trucking industry, which is about 5% of the country's GDP, you know, you could cover every issue in the industry in an hour. You couldn't cover it in a week, but I'm going to do my best to move fast. So if you do have questions, I love dialogue. So, you know, go ahead and raise your hand and I can clarify it. Otherwise, we'll save Q&A for the end, I think. So we're a not-for-profit research organization of the trucking industry. All of our research, when it's completed, is published online free of charge. Come to this website. You can even join our contact database so that when the research is published and released, you automatically get a PDF of it. So I'd urge you to do that. We do research in a whole bunch of different areas, and that's why I say we're going to give you a quick scan of some of that today. So my board of directors are presidents and CEOs, and in a couple instances, chairman of these companies. I think we have Werner buried up here behind this thing. Derek Leser's CEO. There we have our Nebraska fleet. Since those folks are not in the room today, I'll tell you that in some ways this is the more important group. This is our research advisory committee. They get together. Larry, were you on our RAD one time? Yeah. Okay. They get together once a year face-to-face and a couple times via webinars to discuss big issues in the industry and then identify research problem statements that would address those issues. So I'm going to jump back and forth today between the research identified by our RAC along with the survey we do on top industry issues. And you'll see a lot of overlap with these. This is made up of federal government, state government, there's carriers, there are academics, OIDA and Teamsters side by side. It's a great group, a little bit like herding cats, but it works out in the process. So that's our RAC. So here are the economic slides I'm going to fly through really quickly. There is the sense right now in the trucking industry and on Wall Street that there's a softening in the economy. And by any definition, there is a softening in the economy, but it's still positive growth. We're not talking recession. It's not a contraction. So I'm going to show you a few things related to that because I'm a naive optimist. I'm an armchair economist, not professionally trained. But this is the unemployment rate here, and you can't see it. It goes all the way down. Hey, Brenda Lance is on. Hey, Brenda. We work closely with Brenda, North Dakota State University. If you were to see this trend line, which you can't quite see, it gets down to about 3.5% unemployment. Extremely low. Believe it or not, under 4 to 3.8% unemployment, it's bad. You start to become very inflationary. You're cannibalizing industries to fill jobs. But on paper, it looks great. The unemployment is so low. What's really important also is that coming out of the Great Recession, there was criticism legitimately that wages were not keeping up with job growth. They were very, very stable. But now you can see wages and earnings are really quite good. You know, you want your 401k to grow faster than that, but if you had a country's GDP at 3.4%, it would be a hot economy. So this is good. Job increases, wages going up, shows good signs. Retail sales. The consumer is literally 68% of this country's GDP. So everything goes on at retail sales and consumer sales. When the consumer is confident, he buys more money, and you don't see really any serious blips in this trend line. So even when we see little pockets of instability or slowing down, the consumer is going out there fickle and buying more and more, and here's a technical term, more and more crap. And that just keeps the trend line going for retail sales, so that's a phenomenal sign. Housing starts, well, first of all, when you're going to build a house, you bring in a bunch of flatbed trucks, you load it up with plywood, steel, nails. Then when the house is built, you run off to places like Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, wherever, Walmart, and you fill it up with junk. So housing starts are very, very important to sort of monitor the health of the trucking industry. Now, I don't love this little blip here where we're starting to go down in 19, but most importantly, we knew that, by the way, as a trucking industry, we saw softening in 2016, which we came right out of, 2017, 18, phenomenal, hot economies. So we see these little blips in 16. It's still not as bad as that, and we rebounded very nicely. So again, I don't think we have a recession coming. Factory output, solid. I told you I have so much to get through that I'm going to blow through the economic ones. Now, truckloads, again, very volatile, but right now in this quote-unquote softening economy, it's still not nearly as low as this softened economy, which we rebounded out of very quickly. I will tell you in a second, spot markets, I'm not going to get into spot markets. There's contract rates and there's spot market rates. Spot markets are the drivers who are going to go anywhere to pick up an unexpected load, and they're paid more. A lot of folks love that. But the economy was so hot in 17, 18 that they said, I'm not going to play this spot market game and drive all over the country anymore. I'm going to lock up my rates with contract rates, particularly for the big shippers and receivers. And so I don't think this is as telling as people left the spot market rate and went into contract rates. Now, the bad news is we're renegotiating a lot of contracts with the shippers and receivers, or now I call them shippers and receivers, you know, the 3Ms, the Walmarts of the world. And when you renegotiate in an economy right now where it looks a little bit of soft, they force the prices down. And then next year, it's going to be a banner economy, and we're going to be stuck with low pricing for 1 year. So that's a little bit of an unintended consequence. All of this softening, so this is Dan Murray speculating. If I were in Vegas, I'd bet on 3 things to turn this economy around in hours, if not days. Number one, we got to get the China trade deal cut. Got to get that cut. It's scaring the heck out of everyone from the shippers and receivers to Wall Street. When that's cut and we officially have signed phase 1, I'd like the whole thing to be resolved. You'll see everyone all of a sudden taking a big, deep breath, sigh of relief, and things will be better. Number 2, I want an infrastructure bill out of Congress. Now, Congress today can't get anything done. We certainly know that. But an infrastructure bill is low-hanging fruit. It's a win-win whether you're on either party. The only problem is they're scared right now about raising the federal fuel tax. It hasn't been raised since 1993. It is way below any inflationary offsets. We have to raise the federal fuel tax. It's intelligent to do that versus tolling the United States or mileage-based user fees, debiting your bank account with GPS devices, which don't exist in your cars today at all. So federal fuel tax goes up, infrastructure bill as much as $1 trillion, hundreds of thousands of new construction jobs, trucks going everywhere with goods, raw goods, etc. So that's the other one. The third one I can't help you with. That's the 2020 election. Until that is settled, nobody really knows what our tax system is going to look like, what the economy is going to look like. So, but give me 2 out of the 3, the China trade deal and an infrastructure bill, this economy will be buzzing again like crazy. Any comments or questions about economics in the trucking industry? Ooh, okay, I can move on. So we survey thousands and thousands of trucking company executives and truck drivers every single year. We've been doing it for a decade. It's a really powerful report to get because we give you the list going back 10 years, and it becomes a very important barometer for ATRI, ATA, and government folks to see what's coming and going in terms of those issues. I often say to my friends, certainly in Washington, D.C., I'm in Minneapolis, St. Paul, by the way, but we're headquartered in Washington, D.C., go figure. I always say to my friends in Washington, D.C., particularly at the U.S. Department of Transportation, If you're not dealing with this list or something on this list, you're not going to get the trucking industry's attention, period. Now, this list here, if you see the yellow numbers, that was the rank order last year. It's very rare, but 2 times now in this new list, we have an entirely new issue, driver compensation and driver detention at shipper-receiver facilities. We basically get stuck there for hours and hours. They're not going to load or unload, and I'm losing time and money, both the drivers and the carriers. I'm not going to go through this list in great detail. I think it's very, very powerful, though, to separate out this list by truck drivers and motor carrier executives. Driver shortage has been an ugly, ugly issue for the trucking industry, particularly the motor carriers who are trying to hire them, for 3 or 4 years. And they say to us at ATRI, how do I address driver shortage? And when I get the drivers, how do I retain them? We tell them, just look at this list. These are the most important things for the truck driver. You want to resolve these 2 issues, resolve these issues. Now, you're not going to mitigate all those issues, but you can start to pick away at them and start to do something with them, working with government in particular. I'm going to point out truck parking in a little while with some slides, but up until this year, when it dropped to number 3, truck parking was the number 2 issue for truck drivers for 2 years in a row. And if you know anything about the truck driver world, these guys are dealing with dozens of issues daily, monthly, annually. And can you imagine truck parking was the number 2 issue for 2 years in a row? And folks are like, what does truck parking have to do with anything besides safety, compliance with hours of service? But I'm going to show you in a little bit that it literally takes money right out of their pocketbook. And it's sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back and forces them out of the industry. So we'll talk about truck parking in a second. And I'll miss some of these things in terms of my projects I've got listed up here. So burn that into your memory, and we can come back at Q&A if you have other questions. If you're an economist or in accounting or finance, is there anybody in the room that's into economics, finance, or accounting? Good, because that means you guys have lives. That's wonderful. We collect up financial data from hundreds of trucking companies under confidentiality agreements, and we sort that data out and we generate line item costs. We aggregate it for the whole industry, but if you grab the report, you can break it out by sector, fleet size, region of the country. I took a few slides out because it was getting painfully long, but it's based on a very large data set. We have owner-operators up to very, very large companies, as you can imagine. And here's just some overall data. What I think is really powerful, though, if you're monitoring economics or the health of the industry or even line item activities in the industry, and again, you can't quite see the 17 data, which was in the 18 report. By the way, wait 2 weeks, and we're releasing, I was reading last night, in fact, Larry, the 2019 report will be out in 2 weeks with the 2018 data in it. There are amazing stories built into this. You have to go back to industry and say, what the heck's going on? But one of my favorite ones to sort of call out here is repair and maintenance. During the Great Recession, we kept these trucks a long time. I'm primarily talking 18-wheelers, tractor trailers. Kept them a long time. They got really, really expensive to maintain. Thousands and thousands of dollars a year spent keeping these old behemoths going. Great Recession ends. We're buying record and ordering, manufacturing, and selling record tractors and trailers like you can't believe. What you can't quite see very well is while these trucks are really new and getting newer in terms of fleet sizes and ages, they got even more expensive. And they're like, what the heck's going on there? Well, 2 things. Number one, if any of you have lifted the lid on your new vehicle, you can't figure out anything in there. You're going to go pay through the nose to get anything repaired. It's the same thing with these trucks. Very, very sophisticated systems. Diagnostics alone cost thousands of dollars. The parts coming out of Southeast Asia, thousands of dollars. So the newer the truck, the more expensive to repair and maintain. But the other thing built in here, if you're interested in labor issues, second only to the driver shortage issue in the trucking industry, the diesel technician shortage is really bad, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse because we can't get enough technicians in right now to fix 2019 trucks. Imagine what happens when you start incorporating radar, LiDAR, video optics, advanced driver assistance systems, and there's no training centers for those folks, let alone some of the technologies we have. So diesel technician labor is built into that, and we see the labor costs going way up for both technicians and drivers. Also, insurance. I'm going to talk a little bit about nuclear verdicts in a slide or two coming up, but insurance increases in the trucking industry are double digits every single year, no matter how safe you are. no matter how unsafe you are, insurance is going to become, it's the second fastest growing line item in the 19 report. I'm not supposed to tell you that because it's not out yet. But insurance is going to be the last straw that starts to put trucking companies into bankruptcy, if you can imagine that. We'll talk in a second about that. The best news in here, cost going up is bad, usually eats into profit margins, and I have to start cherry picking. Am I going to fill my tank up with gas, or am I going to pay the drivers? But driver wages are going up. And that's a phenomenal thing because there's all kinds of empirical and anecdotal research that says a satisfied driver is a safe driver. So retention is improving because wages are going up, bonuses are going up, benefits are going up. That's good to address the driver shortage. It just begs the question, at what point do we start cannibalizing other line item costs to pay the drivers? So I'm going to show you in a couple more slides our cost of congestion research, but I only threw up the cost per hour because, well, the industry uses this to benchmark against their peers of all fleets and sectors. Hourly costs allow you to say, how much is congestion costing me? How much are truck bottlenecks costing me? How much are regulations? So if I'm delayed an hour, and you can't quite see this, it's over $66 an hour, fully loaded marginal cost to operate a truck 1 hour, 66 bucks. Again, 2019, I can't officially tell you what's going to happen, but let's pretend you're looking at the thumb direction of my hand here. Costs are not going to be scaling back in the trucking industry for quite some time. But one place I'm very satisfied that costs are going up is incentive-based programs, reward-based programs, performance-based programs. We're starting to now reward the driver for good things like on-time delivery, safety. What's not listed here, but you'll see in the report, is there are even green bonuses. Sometimes they call them fuel economy bonuses, but stay out of non-attainment areas, keep your fuel economy in a certain narrow sweet spot, and I'll start to pay you some of the money I'm saving. And so we see bonuses improving dramatically, and I think that will make the industry both more efficient and safer. Now, this is an interesting slide because it doesn't include owner-operators, chameleon carriers. You know, I filed bankruptcy as D. Murray today, and tomorrow I'm operating as Dan Murray. And so that does happen among owner-operators and small fleets sometimes. What's important is these are 5 trucks or more. And what's really interesting about this is you can see the economy and other externalities built into everything here. This right here, time-wise, was the .com implosion when we're going to be eating and breathing and surviving on the internet, which of course didn't happen, but the bankruptcy skyrocketed. Here's a really solid economy here. This was still a hot economy in 2005, but the housing bubble was driving up interest rates. So believe it or not, interest rates go up here, and the trucking industry starts filing bankruptcy. Again, that sort of semi-fixed because fuel costs and other things went down here, but this is the Great Recession, so you expect that. The Great Recession ended here and things are doing great. But 13-14 was a stellar economy. Fuel costs are dirt cheap. There is no explanation for this uptick in failures except for one thing. If you map this time period, government regulations, EPA engine mandates, NHTSA vehicle requirements, roll stability systems, trailer worthiness, crashworthiness, FMCSA, new entrants, CSA and PSP are safety programs. At the end of the day, the margins in the industry are so slim that little externalities create bankruptcies to the tune of hundreds out there. So now things are great again, but I'm sort of intrigued in, say, late 18 and 19. I think you're going to see bankruptcy starting to climb again for different reasons. But this sort of data, which might not seem relevant, becomes sort of an interesting, again, barometer or crystal ball on what's going on. You just got to add that little extra layer of research. Driver turnover rates, if you're interested in truck drivers, the shortage, turnover rates, and other things, these numbers might seem high to you. Let's just pick on 98% since you can't quite see 17 in there. I think it's 85% buried behind there. That means every single year, and these are truckload, mostly large truckload, every single year, I turn over 85% of my truck drivers every single year. Now, what's a dirty secret is we have veteran drivers who've been in the industry 20, 30, 40 years. They're buried in these numbers. These numbers are far worse than that. The denominator is being sort of suppressed by the veteran drivers. So I have to go hire, pretty much almost double these numbers to keep the drivers that I do keep in my labor force. Now it costs $4,000 to $11,000 to train a driver and get him up to speed between CDL requirements and remedial training, etc. So this is a very costly endeavor. The only thing that's really interesting, and maybe the only good news in this, is in 2004, 5, and 6, driver turnover rates were about 80%, 60 to 80% higher than this. J.B. Hunt announced in late 2005 its turnover rate was 132%. That means I hire 132 drivers and they're gone and I start over and do that every single year. We're talking companies like that spending hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars every single year to keep the drivers trained and in the cab of the truck. We got to fix the driver shortage issue. We're looking for any sort of tools in the toolbox. I have a couple coming up I'm going to talk about, but this is a big issue. It's why it's the #1 issue, in fact. Unfortunately, just paying them more, improving quality of life, improving the perception that it's not a bad job, but a good job, is not going to be enough. Because if you look at the census data, you discover that the trucking industry has the absolute oldest employment center compared to all the other major labor sectors in the U.S. economy. We're the oldest, and because you can't drive a truck in the United States till you're 21 years old interstate, we have the smallest percentage of incoming. If we don't fix the numbers, we're in trouble. Now, I can't make anybody younger. I've tried, it didn't work, look at my hairline. So I can't make these folks younger, but what could I do down here? Well, I didn't put these slides in, but we did talk about this morning. We're working at the University of Minnesota Department of Psychology. We've developed a driver assessment tool that is going to hopefully identify super safe younger drivers, 18 to 20, which cannot legally drive a truck interstate. And we found the scores for super safe veteran drivers, and we're going to start testing younger drivers, 18 to 20, look for those identical scores, and see if with an FMCSA exemption we can't run younger drivers, which hopefully will move this line back up to competitive with all other industries. So this is the interesting stuff versus all that boring economic stuff. So ATRI found itself back in 2002 experimenting with truck GPS data. Now this is embedded GPS data. It's not a smartphone or a handheld device moving around in and out of a truck, going up to the restroom, getting a signature for a package. These are embedded. We have over 1 million trucks in North America, almost all real time. Truck goes down there, within about 10 seconds in our Atlanta computer, you can see it moving. There's no base map under here. It's a satellite image. This is what 24 hours of truck activity in the United States look like. My friends in the Class 1 railroads, if they say we got to get trucks off the road and put them onto trains, I say you better have a train network that looks like that because that's what the consumers want. You can also see economic activity in here that didn't exist. Here's Puerto Rico. Anybody from North Dakota originally? Okay. North Dakota was a black hole when it came to GPS data maybe 15 years ago. And then the Bakken oil field shows up, and look at the densities here for the Bakken oil field. Same thing with the Canadian oil shale and oil sands up here. And if you drill in, you can see a lot of stuff. So I'm just showing you this because we found out this GPS data is a powerful input to a lot of research we're doing and others are doing. We partner with a lot of consulting firms and academic institutions. If you wanted to see, again, what a sort of a time series of GPS data looks like, this is a very small sample of 3,000 trucks in Atlanta at point A, and I'm going to walk you through what that network looks like. Just 3,000 trucks over a 7-day time period. So we get 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, 5 days, 7 days. 3,000 trucks are doing this in the United States. Now, in terms of 18-wheelers, there's about 3.5 million trucks. So imagine what that network looks like. Frankly, it looks a lot like this. Now, we only have a sample of the 18-wheelers. About 89% of our data is 18-wheelers, 11% straight trucks. But our sample is pretty big. It's been independently assessed by Iowa DOT, Florida DOT, and Cambridge Systematics, a consulting firm. And we're usually in the vicinity of 30 to 50% of all 18-wheelers out there. So it's a big sample. We were talking earlier this morning, we've developed methodologies to sort of extrapolate or expand our data up to 100% of the trucks when we need to. There's different ways of doing that, and they all seem to be pretty promising. But it's a big data set, and it becomes a very important input for things like this, like the cost of congestion. I mentioned we have this terrible, terrible driver shortage problem. Congestion is so bad that when we use the GPS data and we look at deviation from free flow speed, how many hours are you losing by being stuck in congestion, morning, afternoon, rush hours, whatever it is, incidents and work zones. We look at the hour deviation from free flow, we multiply it by that hourly rate of say $66, and we discover that just on the national highway system, which is about 220,000 miles, far from the 4 million miles of roadway in the US, just on the NHS, the industry is losing almost $75 billion a year in lost productivity. And that's direct productivity. And given that we have this bad driver shortage problem, it's the equivalent of idling 425,000 truck drivers every year for a single year. If we could free these people up, if we're not going to eliminate rush hour congestion by a long shot, but if we could free them up to expand to several hours more every single day, all of these numbers drop, the economy becomes much more efficient, and the fickle retailers like us who want goods this afternoon or tomorrow morning are even going to be more satisfied by moving the trucks faster. We do have this research, again, identifying, we monitor in real time 300 locations in the United States. We add more every year, and then we come up with the top 25 and the top 100 bottlenecks. So I'd urge you to go get it. If you look closely, you'll discover you don't really have a major congestion problem here, and certainly not Lincoln or Omaha. You can do an assessment with our data to say, okay, it doesn't show up on the national list, but if you take all the locations in Nebraska, what does that priority look like? And we can do that, we have. If you're a cynic, like I am, if you're a cynic and say we can't build our way out of congestion, even with $1 trillion infrastructure bill, what hope do we have? And I just want to show you, because there is a glimmer of hope. Chicago Circle Interchange. Anybody from Chicago? I know Larry and I both lived there for a while. This is the Chicago Circle Interchange. They renamed it recently the Jane Byrne Interchange. It had been the #1 bottleneck in the country for 3 years in a row. And former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn said, I'm sick of being on the ATRI list. He commissioned a $40 million design study. A year and a half later, the Illinois State Legislature bonded $475 billion to start reconstruction. They built a temporary truck bypass lane. And it's temporary, and we'll go back to more construction and slow us down again. But this temporary truck bypass lane increased truck speeds an average of 11 miles per hour, which is a massive increase in truck speeds. And sure enough, you can drop down the list. Now, frankly, this is the George Washington Bridge. That's back up to the top. But it does give us a hint that with the right targeted investment in infrastructure, we can make positive improvements in things like traffic congestion. This one you won't care quite as much about, but there's a federal docket out there right now, just closed on October 21, that says, should we allow truck drivers to flex their time more? We have this very prescriptive hours of service program which says you're on duty 14, you can drive 11 hours straight, but then when you get to 10 hours off duty, it better be 10 hours or 8 and 2, and that's it. You can't play around with that. So we use the GPS data to experiment and say, here's Atlanta, ugly, ugly bottlenecks all over Atlanta. What if we allowed the driver to flex that 10 hours so that he could avoid rush hour traffic? And everyone's saying, well, that's an interesting economic study. And we discovered that the most efficient trip to get through ugly Atlanta is $42. But depending on where and when I get stuck in Atlanta bottlenecks, I could spend $100. Dramatic differences. And again, we want those goods there expedited to our homes and our stores. This gives the driver an opportunity to flex his time and get the goods to where it needs to go. Now, fair enough. Safety advocates will say, well, that's an economic analysis that ATRI did. By the way, FMCSA in the docket said we only considered 3 research studies, and ours is one of them. So we were, felt redeemed by that. But the safety advocates legitimately say, where's the safety data on this? And here's the safety data. If you look at the DOT's own data on crash risk, this is old, but we updated to 14, but I didn't have it with me on my laptop. If you look at crash risk probability by time of day, the absolute worst time to be driving a truck for a safety reason, morning rush hour, afternoon rush hour. You don't have a lot of high consequence, say, fatality crashes because you're moving 7 miles an hour. But the PDOs, as the insurance industry calls that, property damage only and injuries, skyrocket during these times of day. So quite candidly, not only do we flex the driver out of the rush hour and improve the efficiency of supply chains, we're likely to improve safety if we allow the drivers the flexibility that they would like and the motor carriers would certainly like. Which brings us to another safety-related one. So we do this crash predictor study. I'm going to tell you right now, in fact, Brenda Lance, who's on, is sort of the guru of this data. We analyzed between 430,000 and 500,000 truck driver records. We've done 3 iterations of this. We've got another one coming out in early 2020. And we basically cross-reference through, statistical analyses, historical stuff on a driver's record. We'll grab any of your records, not really because you're not truck drivers, but we'll look at their motor vehicle, we'll look at violations, convictions of all sorts, and then we grab the crash data, and we look at the historical relationship between having bad stuff on your record and future crash probability. And there's some interesting stories in here. In general, the trucking industry used to think safety, it's all general. Even driver simulators, learn to drive in bad weather, learn to drive in traffic. We can now prove that there are very specific driver behaviors, as we call them, that have the highest crash probabilities. And we really need to recalibrate safety to focus on, this is the top 10 list, but the list you'll see in the report goes considerably down deeper than this. So if you have a reckless driving violation, 114% increase in the future probability of a crash. But I tell folks that you can probably train these things from showing up on a driver's record, and if they already have them through remedial training, you quite likely could train it to not have that crash probability. The one exception to that is probably a reckless driving. I get nervous about this one because in a four-wheeler, as we call our cars, this is probably a DUI. And that may be indicative of substance abuse and everything else. So this one's going to be difficult to deal with, particularly from an insurance industry standpoint, but these are all things we can manage if we know about them and the statistical relationships here. So I throw that up. This is one my wife claps about. Every statistically significant category of crash probability, female drivers are just safer. They're just safer. In fact, just being a man, your likelihood of having a crash in the data goes up 20%. Now, the reason this is important is women only make up between 6.5 and 8% of the truck driver population. They're 48% of the labor force. We're doing something wrong in the industry. We're not attracting the women drivers, and they're better and safer. So the insurance industry needs to step up to the plate and figure out, hey, maybe we need to disconnect general premium and policy and risk assessments between males and females and start to say, let's target premiums and incentives by at least gender in this instance, and that might help attract more and more women to the industry. We're doing other things like automatic transmissions, seat belts. We've revised ergonomics of seats and seat belts. We're improving security at truck parking facilities, but this is one that we haven't done anything with. Please.
And your stats on your convictions, are those unrelated to crashes? Like most crashes, right? Like there was a conviction that went with it. So then are those separated out?
It's interesting because we haven't sort of compounded the effects of these when we cross-reference this, but our new study is going to do that. So this is a standalone. If you just have a crash, so your question is, are there confounding variables, as in, are these impacted at all by these other things? Crash plus speeding. Right now, as a standalone, a past crash is 74%. And the very next one, we're going to start to cobble together the effects of different behaviors to see if these go up and down. Quite candidly, and I think your question is excellent, if I did have a speeding ticket and a crash together, I would suspect intuitively that these numbers would get substantially higher. So now I can cherry pick, I can create packets of violations and convictions that have these really, really high probabilities. And quite candidly, maybe just get rid of those drivers. From the safety standpoint, it'll be awesome. From the driver shortage standpoint, it might not be. These 5 things here have been on all 3 crash predictor studies over the course of the 8 or 9 years we've been doing this. So we say to motor carriers, these you can count on causing crashes in the future. So focus on these activities here in terms of eliminating or mitigating or at least addressing them. Which brings us to nuclear verdicts. Never before has this trucking industry seen I'm going to use this non-research term, the ugly impact and consequence of jury awards and out-of-court settlements. If you look at government data, in 2000 or so, FHWA did an assessment between where car truck crashes were involved and found out that 71% of the time the car driver was given the critical or causal factor. Transport Canada, the Canadian DOT, did their own study 1 year later, and coincidentally, using only Canadian data, found out that 71% of the time the car driver is primarily responsible. The AAA, the Automobile Club, the AAA Foundation, they have their own NCHRP, or not-for-profit, they said there's no way our members are that responsible. So they did their own study. 75% of the time the car driver was given the primary causal factor. So at the end of the day, the car drivers are mostly doing dumb things around the trucks, but the jury awards are going after the deep pockets. And so the trial lawyers have become very successful. Now, we have a major research initiative underway. I can't tell you a lot about it. I'm hoping it's going to be released in probably early February, talking to plaintiffs' attorneys, defense attorneys, insurance industry, motor carriers, truck drivers. Everyone's to blame for this, but the numbers are getting ugly. Let me give you an example. It's public information. So Werner Transportation, headquartered in Nebraska, and Derek's on my board. They had a crash in Texas. And by the way, where you have your crash is going to dictate a lot about how much money you're going to pay. They had a crash in Texas. The other vehicle, the weather was a little inclement. The other vehicle hits an icy patch, we'll say. The other vehicle crosses the median, hits the Werner truck head on. The Werner truck was going 10 miles an hour below the posted speed limit. There was a fatality and a catastrophic injury, and kids were involved, which is never a good thing. $90 million verdict against Werner. $90 million verdict against Werner. A week and a half ago, another instance where the primary factor was probably the car driver. Werner, $40.5 million verdict. This is in the course of a couple months. You got 90 and 40 happening all the time. An Indiana motor carrier that moves RVs announced early this week they're filing bankruptcy because they got a $24 million verdict against them. They're going to let hundreds of people go. And what it comes down to is there's a huge disconnect between negligence and liability. And it's the civil litigation environment. It's problematic. It's going to be a big hit in insurance costs. And it's primarily the reason that super safe trucking companies are paying double-digit insurance increases. And that's going to lead to that next blip in the bankruptcies that I showed you earlier. I'm going to fly through this pretty quickly. Detention time is a huge issue. You saw it show up on the truck driver list in particular, new. It's because when we get to these shipper receivers and we sit there, and we sit there, and we sit there, and we need to be unloaded or loaded, and we need to get on the road. The truck drivers are primarily paid by the mile, certainly the over the road drivers, and they're making $0 while I'm being held up at a shipper receiver facility. So we did an analysis of this, and you can't quite see it, but suffice it to say detention is getting worse and worse. And the reason is, and you have to go read the research, the trucking industry in a good economy gears up. It has lots of trucks, it has lots of drivers. It does everything to gear up for huge increases in freight tonnage. The shipper receiver community essentially did nothing. Same number of docks, same number of dock workers, chain link fence with a semi-retired security guy out opening the gate, letting me in. There's technology solutions. There's all kinds of tools to increase the productivity of the shippers receivers, but they're not doing it. And therefore, we're sort of taking it on the chin in the trucking industry. If an average truck gets $66 an hour, those carriers, and it's only the big ones, who charge what's called a detention fee, they'll go send an invoice saying, I sat there for 4 hours, I'm going to charge you 4 times $63 an hour. They're still losing money on every single hour of detention when you look at the delta between these numbers. So we got to fix that. And what has me really concerned from that bankruptcy standpoint is small trucking companies are scared to charge anything. They're trying to keep up with the big guys by looking the other way and saying, okay, you're costing me a ton of money, but I don't want to lose your business, so I'm just going to ignore the detention, and the driver suffers and the motor carrier suffers, and that, I think, is also going to lead to bankruptcies among the small guys. So here's our GPS data. We're doing a lot with truck parking. Remember I told you 2 years in a row is the number 2 issue for drivers. It's still number 3. we can look at the GPS data in real time. These are 2 public rest stops. We can tell the capacity because we do this expansion factor. We know how many spaces are here. And as you'd expect, they fill up. The driver's out of federal hours of service. It's a federal law for him to keep driving. So what's he going to do? He's going to park on shoulders, exit ramps, and a whole bunch of bad places you should not be parking trucks. You can see it everywhere. Here's the public rest stop. It's full. They're lined up all the way back to the Cloverleaf. It's a problem. It's a serious problem. It's why the truck drivers are complaining and they're leaving the industry. So we've surveyed about 18,000 truck drivers over the last 3 years on truck parking issues, but we've said, you know, it's not a deep dive. We're going to send them out into the marketplace with a diary. These folks are, you know, are godlike in my mind because every single time they stopped, when, where, how, why, they filled out this diary. So we have the equivalent of 2,000 days, 4,700 unique stops, and again, they fleshed out the qualitative data behind all these truck parking issues. And I'm only going to show you probably 3 slides on what we could discern from that data. The first thing is, and it's not surprising, truck drivers want to use apps to identify truck parking opportunities and availability. A whole bunch of states are moving very quickly. I don't think Nebraska's in the MASTO grant, but 8 states in the Midwest got a $25 million grant to build real-time truck parking information systems. Send availability, count spaces with cameras, magnetometers, and then send that information to the truck driver via apps and a series of other things, changeable message signs. This seems logical in the 21st century that I want to use an app to find my parking. Small problem. So talking about conflict of policy, in January 2013, FMCSA passed a new law that as a truck driver, if I'm in my truck, I press my smartphone the second time, it's a $2,000 fine to the driver and $11,000 fine to the motor carrier on the second press of a smartphone button. So here we have the entire world in the 21st century using apps, and it's a very efficient mechanism, but it's illegal in terms of federal law for truck drivers to do that. So we're going to have to figure this one out. We're going to have to find systems that allow a truck driver to be legally distracted and use his smartphone app so he can find parking so he's in compliance with federal law. If you figure that one out, you'll be a millionaire. But I think there's some solutions with advanced and autonomous technologies, I'm hopeful. The other one, 3 to 4 times a week, more than a third of all truck drivers are parking illegally. Now, when you want them to answer a survey, don't say illegal, say unauthorized. But 3 to 4 times a week, of that number, only 3% are parking illegally when they have legal safe parking. So this is a serious issue from a safety standpoint that there's no alternatives out there. So we're working with the US DOT, a lot of state DOTs are doing research on truck parking. Even a brownfield, you know, if you take a brownfield, put a satellite bathroom, a garbage container, and some lighting, particularly for women drivers, fencing and lighting is important for security. It's an adequate truck parking facility. So we're doing this all over the country, looking for ways to increase capacity, and I'm excited about that. This is the reason it's always a top 3 issue for truck drivers, aside from compliance, fatigue management, et cetera. Using GPS data and the diary data, we find out that truck drivers are spending on average 56 minutes a day leaving a revenue run, which means I'm not getting paid. I leave the revenue run, I spend 56 minutes a day. If you multiply that by the driver wage data, it comes out to be about $4,600. If you're an economist, you always say, "Dan, you idiot." That's not an opportunity cost, it's a direct cost. So $4,600 a year in lost wages looking for truck parking. Coincidentally, if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you don't need to do this, but I'm going to tell you this, they have the average truck driver annual wage at about $47,000 a year, which means nearly 10% of their wages are lost looking for truck parking. It's a big to-do. We got an e-commerce study underway. If you could see this, these are retail sales. This is the big box here. Macy's, Sears, Kmart, JCPenney's closing 10, well, we're close to 10,000 stores already. Limited Brands as a company, gone. Payless Shoes, gone. You'll see more disappear in the next 3 years because e-commerce, if you're not nimble and keeping up with the 21st century economy, you're going to disappear. And that's what's happening with this data. So we did an e-commerce study saying, what's the impact of e-commerce on trucking? And one of the most powerful and telling things is truck trips are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. If you had an 18-wheeler 10 or 15 years ago, and I said, how many miles a year do you get? Easily 130,000, 140,000 a year, easy. The average based on our data, and now the US DOT is using this, is 91,000 miles a year. We've gone from 140,000 to 91,000. Truck registrations are way up, truck trips are way up, but trip lengths are getting shorter and shorter, partially because we get the drivers home more often by doing drop and hook and hub and spoke, but partially because we're shifting to straight trucks and many more short trips, filling fulfillment centers, warehousing, et cetera. So we did this study, we looked at e-commerce impacts. I'm going to fly through this a little bit more carefully. 18-wheeler growth is still there, 4.4% growth in truck registrations among 18-wheelers, but closing in on 10%, and it will be 10% when you look at the 17-18 data, of truck registrations are straight trucks. But we are moving from big trucks to small trucks to maintain this e-commerce network. I'm going to talk about autonomous trucks right now very briefly. Does anybody recognize the Colorado Beer Run? Has anybody heard about that? So this is in 2016, the gentleman who started this company, Anthony Lewandowski, you've probably seen him in the news. He's been sort of indicted with a big battle between Google and Uber. But he started a company called Otto, and it was bought right at this time period by Uber, Advanced Driving Systems. And he built this autonomous truck that did everything. It was amazing. One of my RAC members, Deputy Chief Mark Savage, number 2 guy at Colorado State Patrol, he and I were the 2 independent observers. This officially is now in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest autonomous marketplace vehicle trip between cars and trucks. So they get up onto I-25 in Colorado, and by a smart PR move, 51,000 cans of Budweiser beer. So if it didn't work, at least you got the Budweiser story going for you. But he got up onto I-25 between Fort Collins and Colorado Springs. He pushed a couple autonomous buttons, I-25, 126 miles, 3 hours. At the start of that trip, the truck driver got back in the sleeper berth and sat there the entire time. Neural networks, artificial intelligence, whatever you call it, this truck had learned over and over how to operate without a human being, and it did for 3 hours on the interstate. It was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. 2 quick stories, one on why autonomous vehicles are the way of the future, and one on why it probably won't happen in our lifetime. The pro story is the truck's 55 miles an hour governed, managing the middle lanes, changing lanes, accelerating, decelerating, signaling, all on its own. A car comes racing up in the left lane, top speed. What's that car going to do? Guesses? In the trucking industry, you know what it's going to do. It's going to cut in front of you and tap on the brakes. But this truck had learned after 15 beta runs the statistical probability that the four-wheeler is going to make this dumb move. So the car comes racing up, the truck started braking before the human said, I'm going to do something stupid. And so it was a non-issue because the truck was already dramatically slower than the car. The other issue, though, is the car comes racing up at top speed in the left lane, gets to the side of the truck and slams on the brake and stays there for a few seconds. Why? Because he looks up and there's no human in an 80,000-pound truck going 55 miles an hour. I don't care if it's a Tesla or a truck. I look over to Tesla and the guy's got a blood alcohol at 0.08 and he's asleep in the back seat while it's going down the freeway. That's going to freak me out. So the public perception of autonomous technologies is going to be the biggest issue. It's not the technology. They won't get into the technologies here. These are mostly the technologies. I add this one, differential GPS and digitized mapping is so critical. We have something in Minnesota, you have something in Nebraska called snow, fog, and rain. Bandwidth scatter is a huge issue for the top 3. If you had digitized roadways and differential GPS where you had a correction signal from the ground station, this is an all-weather fighter. And that's the system that we're going to have to push forward if we want to get to level 4 and 5. At the end of the day, our research documented how autonomous technologies will impact our issues or our issues. We're a huge believer that autonomous systems will draw people to the industry. These are super cool trucks, and if you're a millennial, and many of you are, imagine multitasking legally, maybe gaming, social media, talking on the phone, all legal because your truck is managing your vehicle. So we think that we're not getting rid of the truck driver because there's so many things he does besides, press on the gas. We think it's going to attract folks who used to think, well, this is a dinosaur industry, I might be interested in it now. So there's a lot of opportunities with autonomous technologies. The big issues are probably not technology related. I've been talking to a dozen insurance companies over the last year. Half of them think autonomous systems are the saving grace for safety. The other half think it's so speculative that if any one of my customers is using autonomous technologies, Tesla, Freightliner, doesn't matter, I'm going to double their insurance premiums because they're not that, that stuff's not going on my policy. So if we don't get things like who's going to get sued, how much is insurance going to cost me, this stuff is dead in the water. This last one in the trucking industry is the biggest issue. So I'm going from today a Freightliner truck. Anyone want to guess what Freightliner trucks are in 2019? That's right, up to $138,000 per truck. So I go to an autonomous truck and our calculations are, particularly with LiDAR thrown in, that's close to $200,000. So I'm going to go to General Mills. I'm going to say, good news, I'm going to move your Cheerios with an autonomous truck now and your prices are going to go up 30%, maybe 40%. And General Mills is going to say, awesome, what do I get out of that? And the answer is nothing. You get nothing, you're just going to pay more. If we don't make modifications to things like hours of service, truck parking, and a whole bunch of other things to give me a payback for that technology, it's not going to go anywhere. Which brings me to this painful acronym. You all know already that we come up with acronyms, and what the heck is ADAS? It's Advanced Driver Assistance System. So that really cool Uber run you saw at level 4, level 4 and level 5 now have moved from, we were racing, 3 to 5 years. Now it's 10 years at least out. We're now focusing on evolutionary changes rather than revolutionary changes. So ADAS are technologies that mostly exist today, but are not highly adopted, not highly integrated. So we just got a big grant from the US DOT to study ADAS systems, and I promise we're going to come up with a better name than that. But essentially, it's things like automated emergency braking. You're driving down the road, you're approaching a vehicle in front of you, the human's not braking, so this will kick on the foundation brakes. Active lane assist. Some of you have lane departure warning systems. It beeps at you when you cross the paint line. These systems will micromanage the steering wheel and keep you between the lines whether you need to or not. If you turn on your signal, it shuts off. So there's a series of the active steering. We've got a bunch of these systems out there. We're going to do the assessment, the ROIs. We're going to do an outreach program. We're going to work with the vendors, and we're going to try to move with carrots rather than sticks these systems into the marketplace. So if you're following autonomous technologies, this is really, really solid level 2 stuff, almost level 3, but solid level 2 stuff. It's going to make driving easier, better, more enjoyable, less monotonous, less fatiguing. So this is where the future, in my opinion, is of autonomous technologies. Just got to come up with a better name. Officially, that's the end. This is my email address. This is my website. You're welcome to go to it. But if you know me, you'll know I lie a little bit about this isn't really the end. Okay, so we did some assessments with the GPS data because we've been talking about critical events and hazmat and everything else. We did something with the GPS data where we started mapping what the truck's networks look like before, during, and after major events. I'll fly through these pretty quick. This is Hurricane Harvey. Officially, the eye hit at Corpus Christi. Houston got flooded and closed everything down. It was a bad hurricane if you were on the Texas coast. If you look at the data, this is before the hurricane hit. This is the hurricane pretty much over the state. All activity in this area has disappeared. But now there's 2 types of resiliency we discovered with this data. This is geographic resiliency. Sure, I can't operate in these areas, but look at Shreveport. Didn't exist on the map as far as networks go. Now we've added the San Antonio, Dallas, Shreveport leg. It added about 250 miles, almost $300 in additional cost, but the goods kept moving. The hurricane did not stop, slowed down, lengthened, but the hurricane did not stop freight movement. So that's sort of this geographic resiliency that we think is pretty impressive. A couple days after the hurricane's gone, believe it or not, Shreveport still had a pretty big density in that lane. Ultimately, this I-10 corridor picked up again, no surprise. A very different experience with the GPS data when Hurricane Irma hit Florida. This is what operations looked like before the hurricane hit, and I have more slides here, so it's not quite as powerful. This is a pickup just before the hurricane hits. Announcement's been made, it's going to be bad. Everyone raced in, emergency goods, pickup and delivery before, because I'm not going to be able to during. And then just as the hurricane's moving in this vicinity upward, you see about in total, I think 82% of all operations cease to exist in Florida. That's because a hurricane is closing the entire state down. There is no geographic alternative, so there's no resiliency. But this we kind of describe as a temporal resiliency, because within 12 hours after the hurricane has become a tropical storm up here, the activity just comes racing back in within 12 hours. And then it's basically back to normal within 2 to 3 days. So we react quickly as an industry, fill in those voids, even when the hurricanes, close down the systems. My very last slide, this happens to unfortunately be a Werner truck. I'll let my board director, Derek Leathers, know. What we did is we took the hurricane data in Texas, the GPS data, and we mapped it with NOAA weather data, which is the hurricane data coming in. And it's just kind of cool to juxtapose truck GPS flows with the hurricane data flows. And I don't know if this will let me do it this way. So I have to step over here by Larry. This is only like 30 seconds long. But
sorry, I put the maps up at the front.
what was that?
The maps is up at the front.
Oh, you did that for me. Thank you so much. Yeah, see, that's technology for you. So again, this is just about 30 seconds. So this is the GPS data as it was just basically a tropical storm. The hurricane's building out here, and you can see, and by the way, we color-coded the flows, so the faster you're going, the more green, orange, yellow, red, whatever. You can see this flurry of activity. And Jeff Short in our office, who does a lot of this analysis, could map FEMA centers, truck terminals, and warehouses, and the nutty truck drivers who had the audacity to be coming into the storm during the hurricane basically were bringing emergency goods, food, water, blankets, generators. But you also see a massive disappearance of activity, because who in the world is going to be under the eye of a hurricane if you can avoid this? This is Corpus Christi where the eye hit. You'll still see some isolated flows, emergency response, which is kind of cool. But mostly in terms of resiliency, what I want you to see is at one point the eye is only about 45 miles from Corpus Christi, and you're going to watch the flow come racing back in with the hurricane just down the road. You'll see in terms of joining the road maps to the GPS, we miss it every now and then. We're almost there. And unfortunately, the eye is going to show up right under this thing here. But so this is the activity picking up. We're back up to about 85% of normal operations, and there's the hurricane right there, about 45 miles outside of Corpus Christi. Again, showing you the resilience of the data, the resilience of the industry. Now, I am officially done right now. I think that technically I have like 3 or 4 minutes for Q&A. I told you I'd go fast, but I'd get it done. So millions of questions, millions of issues buried in that, and another 200 issues that the industry faces. If you have any questions, shoot me an email to dmurray@trucking.org. Visit our website if you have any other. Again, we have research in just about every category you can imagine, going back decades. Unfortunately, that's been converted to PDF. And Larry and I have been talking about potential collaboration, particularly with the GPS data. So I know there's some opportunities for us to consider those. I don't think we're going to iron that all out today, but we'll spend some time doing that. So with that being said, now that I'm hyperventilating, does anybody have questions?
Yeah, early in your presentation, you were talking about kind of the average cost per hour to operate. Salary was in there. There's about $21 some an hour plus $6 in benefits. And I've been hearing that get into trucking, wages are great, you can make $90,000 to $100,000 a year. That hourly rate seems low unless you're really counting on working overtime and a lot of hours. So how is that math working out? It doesn't seem right.
There's mean and medians in there. If you work for a private fleet, you're going to be in the $80,000 to $100,000. You have to obviously annualize that by 2,080 hours, and you're still going to be probably in the $60,000, which isn't too bad. It's a living wage by most standards. But then you also have local P&D in there, which is crummy wages. So if you go to the report and separate out sector, you can see, for instance, if you're a specialized or hazmat driver, you're back up close to the 80 to 100,000. So the sector is critical. It'll be very interesting over time to see what e-commerce does to wages, because a whole bunch of e-commerce is moving from 18-wheelers to straight trucks. And now what we know is a whole bunch of folks, and I'm not saying people in this room, are moving e-commerce packages in the trunk of their Prius. And do you think State Farm knows that you're now a commercial carrier moving Amazon packages at night after work? And the answer is no. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with insurance and safety data as we shift from big trucks to small trucks to personal conveyance. That'll take us a few more years of data collection. But if you grab the report, you can see the striation of wages by sector and fleet size. Other questions? Sir.
Like we've seen that the wage for the drivers increase.
I'm sorry, could you talk up, Chad?
So we've seen that the wage of the driver has increased, the good bonus they have, but still we have driver shortage. So I was wondering what's the reason behind those driver shortage, even though they have a good wage.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So I'll paraphrase for you.
Thank you.
So you showed two things. One is the wages are going up,
Yeah.
and they sound like very good wages, particularly without a university degree, which is what.
I mean, they don't get as much as the grad students in the realm.
Wow, that's right. And but at the same time, you have a shortage. So Ben was wondering why this sort of apparent disconnect between wages going up, good wage, and not having a driver shortage right now.
Driver shortage is really, really complex. We know that there's roles for terrible perception. If you were around, and most of you weren't, let's say in the 60s and 70s, it was, songs, convoy, it was, the American dream to hit the road and you can get decent wages and you're driving a nice truck. And we know the benefits and bonuses are improving. One of the biggest problems is the baby boomers are retiring. Believe it or not, and I'm being flippant here, I shouldn't say this, the greatest thing that happened to the Great Recession is people lost a lot of their retirement savings, so they stayed in the industry longer. And I'm being flippant because that's not a good thing. So we held on to them a little bit longer, but over the next couple of years, retirement is going to go crazy, and there's nothing we can do with wages to help that. So again, I think the younger drivers who do get paid a little bit less, entry-level drivers get paid, but if we add the safety bonus and our assessment tool works out, we get these super safe younger drivers and we give them the safety bonus because they've gone 3 million miles without a crash. I think the math will work out in the long run, but there's lots of disconnects you'll see up there in terms of trend lines, doing this kind of stuff. I'd be having lunch with Warren Buffett next door if I had the solution to the driver shortage problem. I did say to Larry last night, I think this is interesting since we're in Warren Buffett's backyard. What time is he expected here?
He'll be here in about 10 minutes.
Okay. If it's any indication, and I'm biased towards the trucking industry, I've got lots of friends in class 1 as well, but if I'm biased towards the trucking industry and I use external indicators of where the future lies, Warren Buffett, about 10 years ago, bought BNSF Railroad for 2 reasons. Number 1, they had a lock on the Bakken oil field, and number 2, they were the first class 1 to have truck revenue as their number 1 revenue source. So now we're building pipelines to take rail cars out of the Bakken oil field. And when you look at trip lengths getting so short, there's no sweet spot up there left for the class 1s anymore, so they're not going to get much more truck revenue. So what's Warren Buffett doing? He's a genius, right? Pilot Flying J truck stops. He now owns 38% of them, and 5 years ago owned 100% of the largest truck stop operator in the country. So it looks like Warren Buffett's moving from rail to truck. I can't prove it till I have lunch with him, but that's my theory. So that's a side note, but it's a great industry. It's very, very complex. You can cherry pick the numbers. I was saying this morning, when you want this trucking industry to look like a fragmented mom and pop family business, the statistic which is accurate is 96% of all trucking companies are 20 and fewer trucks based on registrations, company registrations. But when you want to, the Transport Topics 100 largest fleets in the country, which include FedEx and UPS, control about 65% of all trucks, all drivers, all freight tonnage, all vehicle miles traveled. That's a legitimate statistic as well. So we sort of have to cherry pick, what story we want to tell when and to whom. But don't tell anybody that little secret advice. Any other comments or questions? If not, I thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And certainly flag me down if I can help you out anywhere along the way. So thanks.
Very good. Thank you.